Hi folks, welcome to part 1 of Frame Academy Project 4, adding interactivity to WebXR sites with JavaScript. So first of all, congratulations on making it this far. If you've gone through projects 1, 2, and 3, you've kind of learned all of the HTML that you need to know in order to kind of graduate to this whole other level of adding interactivity with JavaScript. And that's a huge achievement on its own. So I'm really excited to be here at this point. And now we're going to be adding a whole lot of other cool things to our WebXR sites. So I took a slightly different approach with this project. In the first few projects, I had you start off with kind of an empty starter project, and you kind of built your project sort of along with me as I built mine. For this one, I'm kind of starting you out with a starter project that has a lot of stuff already built into it. And initially here in this part, I'm going to show you, I'm just going to kind of walk you through the starter project so you can see how I put it together. And then you can start editing it and tweaking it and modifying it. And then as we move on, you'll definitely be kind of making it your own as the project progresses. So right below this video on the page for the project, you'll see a button called Copy the Starter Project on Glitch. And if you go ahead and click that, it will make a copy of the starter project that is yours, right, and kind of owned by you. You'll want to make sure you have your own Glitch account up here so that it kind of stores your work. It'll start you out on this little README, but as soon as you go to the index.html, you'll see all of the HTML for the starter project, and you'll see a few other files here that I'll get into in a second. Quick reminder, to view your project, you can click this Show Live button. That'll open up your WebXR site. And if you want to change the URL for it that Glitch automatically kind of generates, like the name for it, you can click this button and give it another name. Okay, so as said, first I'm going to sort of walk you through the starter project so you can see how it's set up, and I'll kind of explain why I set it up that way before we move on to the fun stuff. Although this is pretty fun too. So first, go ahead and just actually check out the starter project, right? Press Show Live so you can see the visuals of what is there. You see I'm kind of making like a little bare bones kind of gallery. I've got a 3D model over here with an animation on it, a little caption. I've got a Picasso painting on the wall with a caption. And I've got a 360 photo back here that you can click on to actually expand out. And then you can click this little kind of lily pad on the ground to go back to the gallery. And I've got some walls, I've got a floor, I've got a photosphere in the background. Okay, so first let's look at the setup in the head element. I've imported my all the scripts that I need for now. Of course, I've got the A-frame script at the top as usual. I've imported the animation component down here. We learned about this one in project 2. And then you'll see a few other components with this URL public/js/ and then the name of the component. And these are components that I actually made, right? These are kind of like homemade A-frame components. I actually made them here in Glitch, right? If you look over on the sidebar, you'll see, sphereexpand.js. It's right here, right? I wrote it right in Glitch. And you'll see back home and example functions.js. So in Glitch, right, not only can you write HTML, but you can write pretty much anything. So if you wanted to make a JavaScript file, for example, you could just press New File. And if you give it this, give it a name that starts with public/js/ and then the name of whatever you're doing, whatever function you're writing, say your function, say .js, because it's a JavaScript file, right? This isn't HTML. It's JavaScript, so it has a different ending there. And then you can just press Add File. And then if you wanted to bring that component into your project, you import it just as you see how I did up here with mine, right? Script source equals, and then you just put the name of the file there. You can also copy any file you see here. So if you wanted to copy one of my components and tweak it, or whatever you want, you could just copy it, and that works too. Okay, so that's it with the head element. Next up on line 15, and you'll notice, I kind of use these line numbers on Glitch as kind of a reference point to make it easy for you to find the code that I'm talking about. Just because as these files get longer, it can be a bit tricky sometimes to kind of quickly go to direct your attention to where I need it. So I'll use these line numbers. Line 15, you'll see my A assets element. This is where I'm loading up different assets like images and photospheres and 3D models in the A-frame asset management system, which we went over in, I believe, Project 3, Part 3. So a quick refresher though, this is where you kind of load your assets so that they preload and get stored in the browser as soon as your website loads. It kind of gets all the loading done out of the way. It doesn't necessarily display them on the site. You still have to do that later on in your HTML, but this kind of preloads and stores your assets. The assets themselves you can find in the assets folder. I've got a few different kind of textures, that wood that you see on the floor. There's the Picasso painting, there's the photosphere, there's the GLB, or the GLTF file for the 3D model. So you can find those here. And if you want to bring other assets into your project, you could just drag them into this folder first, find their URL, and you'll be good to go. Okay, so let's get into the stuff that you actually see now in the scene. And I'll show you why I set it up the way that I did. So let's look at the floors and the walls, right? Kind of like the physical architecture of the scene. So you'll see I've got a parent entity called, I gave it an ID of architecture, and I gave it a class of homeworld. And we're going to get into class in a future part. For now, just take note that it's there, and I'll get into why later. And then nested under this parent entity, I've got a number of children entities, right? I've got the floor, a bunch of planes that are the 4 walls, and then I've got a plane that is the ceiling. You'll see on the ceiling, I had to tweak this material component quite a bit. You can find this component in the A-frame documentation. It's one of the components that comes with A-frame, and I adjusted a bunch of its properties. And I admit I was kind of toying around with a lot of these properties till I got the effect that I wanted, which is kind of like a glassy effect. You can't notice it till you kind of leave the space, but you'll see that the ceiling kind of has like a cool sort of transparency on it, as if it was kind of like a glass material. And if you're curious to hear more about this kind of material stuff, just let me know and I'll make another little section on it. Now you might be wondering, why did I set it up this way? Why do I need a parent entity and all these other children entities nested inside of it? Well, the benefit of this is if I ever wanted to move all of them at once, instead of tweaking the position for each one, I can just tweak the position of the parent entity. Because remember, the children, they get their position is determined by their parent through that concept of relative positioning. So if the parent moves, then the children will move along with it. And there's no better way to kind of see that in action than in the A-frame inspector. So I pressed Control-Alt-I, that pulls up this kind of visual interface for checking out your scene. You can see my parent element here on the left. I can expand it out to see all the children, but with the parent selected, you can see that if I move its position, it's moving the position of, the floor, the walls, and the ceiling all at once. That's because they're all part of the same sort of parent entity. So that's the real advantage, right? If for some reason I needed to move the whole gallery somewhere else, or maybe I wanted the whole gallery to disappear at once, I could actually just move just this parent entity instead of moving each of these individually. So I do a similar thing for things like the Picasso painting, right? I've got a parent entity called Picasso Display, and inside of it you'll see a plane for the frame of the painting, which is this the black border. I've got a plane that has the painting itself as the source, right? The source equals kind of hashtag Picasso, or kind of the pound sign there. That's just referencing this image stored up here in A assets. And then I've also got the caption. And again, this makes it really handy if I wanted to move this whole display on the wall instead of moving them each individually. I just can change the position of the parent entity, or its rotation, or its scale. Okay. Similar thing with the globe. I have it mislabeled here. It's no longer a globe, it's a skull. I used to have a globe here, and I replaced it with this cool Triceratops skull. But if you grab this, you'll see that you can move it all at once, right? Just by moving that parent entity. So that's, again, just to show you, kind of explaining why I've structured my entities this way just to save myself some work later on in case I want to move things around down the line. Okay, last but not least, you have a circle that I've given an ID of home button. This is the thing that you see in the middle of the scene there, that white sort of lily pad. I'm just going to refresh my scene here. If you look down, you'll see it. And I've got the component on there that causes that interactivity to happen of going back to the scene. That's why I've called it the home button, and I'll explain how I've set that up in future parts. Okay, so I hope that you at least have kind of an understanding of the code that's going on in the index.html of the starter project, and that you have just a simple idea of this concept of how you can write your own JavaScript files here in Glitch, and you can bring them into your project just by referencing their file name up here. Okay, for the challenge for this section, I'm just going to make sure that I covered all that I wanted. I believe that I did. That's all good. For the challenge, what I want you to do is kind of start to turn the starter project into your own, right? And you can do that a few ways. You could put the images that you want up on the walls. You could swap out my images or 3D models for other things. You could start to arrange things differently. If you wanted to change the texture of the floor or the wall, or give it a different photosphere in the background, you can use all the skills that you've learned in projects 1, 2, and 3 to start to kind of put your own spin on this starter project, to kind of make it your own. Okay, in the next part, we're going to get into how to make your WebXR site responsive to clicks from the mouse or from a VR controller. So it's about to get really exciting, and yeah, I can't wait. So I'll see you in part 2.